Hey everybody, welcome to the Build Data Cloud Summit for 2021. And I'm Jonathan Sander, Security Field CTO here at Snowflake. And I'm going to be talking to you today about the journey to processing PII in the cloud, a lofty goal. So you may or may not be aware that a little while back, I wrote a blog with the same title as this session here. And it got some attention, which is good, but it also got some questions from technical folks. And really it came down to, but how, right? So what the blog focused on was the aspects of the journey that are important from the business's point of view, from governance, risk and compliance. And it did not fill in a lot of details about how you could accomplish some of the things that it discusses. So today, we're going to hopefully make up for that. Before we get into the technical details, in case you didn't read the blog, which I wouldn't blame you if you didn't, I'll take you through the three main problems that it explores. All right. So first, when you think about using PII or any sort of sensitive information, really, and I might use these monikers interchangeably, right? Sensitive information, PII, things like that. But the first challenge that you face in a lot of cases is simply that people in your own organization might tell you that the idea is completely absurd, right? The whole notion of using a cloud platform to process that sort of information just isn't acceptable. And this is ingrained after years and years of building protections around this information based on how things have operated before. This is also, I think, a little bit because, cloud's scary. When people hear that word, they just associate it with a loss of control in some cases, which is not really that fair. But we have a lot of things I think we can bring to the table to help fight that argument. Not a lot of those are technical details that we'll go into today, but we could do that. The second challenge you're going to face is that you might, in fact, see a lot of brittle processes wrapped around handling your sensitive information. And what I mean by that are exceptions all over the place, custom-built solutions, things that are wrapped around other wrappers and wrapped around other wrappers to make using the PII in those systems okay. Some of that's because a lot of systems weren't built to do that natively, so they don't have the features, and so you end up bringing in a lot of other things to make up for that. Some of it's just because these systems that process sensitive information tend to be the ones that have been around for a long time, because sensitive information can be the first thing an organization has that makes it valuable. And so it's in some of the oldest places, perhaps. And last but not least, you see also a lot of specialized systems here. And of course, this is related to the brittle processes. Part of what makes those processes brittle is that they have these specialized systems. But the specialized systems themselves can present issues because maybe those aren't very portable. And I don't just mean portable to a new platform like Snowflake, but not portable at all. They might be completely bespoke and tied to the way things are done in your organization right now, without exception, right? That's just the way it works. So these are all things you might run into. In the blog, I talk about how to get over that from a business point of view, but today I want to share with you a little bit about how we can help you with Snowflake features, and literally how. We're going to actually go look at that. So if you're up for those business answers, you can go right back to the blog. If you're up for the technical stuff, stick around for a moment. We're going to start the demo, and you can also feel free to do both. Clearly, I'm the author of the blog and the guy who's going to show you the demo, so I like doing both. So stick around with me, and we'll do exactly that. Now, the demo is going to be getting into the security and governance features of Snowflake. That's going to include things like column level security, row access policy. We'll see tagging, which is a public preview feature at the time of this recording. Who knows, might have changed by the time you're watching it. And we'll even see some bonus stuff. I'm going to show you some stuff that's private, but I'll distinguish all of that and let you know what you're going to be able to touch right away and what is going to be private. Hey, everybody. Let's get to the real stuff here in the demo. So like all good demos, some of the stuff is not going to happen in real time, but we're going to do a lot of it. So first of all, I've created a bunch of roles here, and I've also created a bunch of users. And, as a security guy, I have to say, don't use passwords if you can avoid it. You'll actually see a neat trick I'm going to do to avoid that myself. But what we'll see here is that right now, those users have already been loaded into the system, and I can show you that there. So this is all my users. I'm going to begin by granting roles to those users. Then all of those users are also going to need to do SQL type stuff. So they'll need access to some compute in order to do that. So there they go. And of course, we're going to need to have a database to use to do all of the things we're going to do. So as the sysadmin, I will create a new database for Renum Industries, and I'm going to grant that ownership of the database to this ITC admin role. Now, we're going to use that ITC admin role. Oh, what happened here? I don't have that role. But of course I already knew that because I was supposed to start doing this as Richmond. And to do that, I'm going to start using a little bit of command line magic so I can be a lot of people all at once. So to do what Richard needs to do, I'm going to take the SQL here that you will find in ye olde repository once that is up for you. And I'm going to create a schema in that database for Renum Industries, the basement schema. And then I'm going to create a table as well. So let's go ahead and create the table. And while it's creating over there, I'll just point out for a moment, two of the columns are interesting. I'm going to randomly populate the values UK, US, and France into this birth country. I'm also going to randomly populate yes, no, and null into this opt-in column. And we'll see how we're going to use those. Good to point out, too, that I'm getting all the data from this Snowflake sample data that's built into the platform. So if you need to create a random bunch of data, you can actually do that if you wish to. So now that I've created this database, I need to let people use it. Right? So I'm going to go ahead and take all of those grants and run those over here. Now you may notice that I have one of them commented out. Why is that? Well, that's because that ITC admin role created the database, and so they don't actually need select privileges on it since they're the owner. Or are they? What you'll see is that I actually created a schema with something called managed access. Now normally, when you create a schema and you're the owner of it and you create objects you are the owner of those, well, you get to do all the things to those. But you're going to see that since I created this with managed access, I'm actually withholding some of the rights from that owner. And that way I can be much more targeted as to what people can and can't do. That's our first level of putting in controls for this. Now, I do have select rights on it since I did just create it. And as we can see, if I select star from there, I've got a random grouping of birth countries, UK, US, and France. Same thing for this opt-in, sort of random grouping. And, there's a bunch of sensitive information in here. And I'm the admin role. So I shouldn't see any of these things. So let's fix that. First, we're going to allow the InfoSec role to go ahead and start putting policies on to this object. And then we're going to create a table to do some row axis mapping. That'll make sense a little bit. And I'm going to grant ownership on that table to InfoSec because they're going to use that to populate this table. Ooh, what's this? Another problem. But now you know my game, right? So the ownership restriction of the managed access schema is not letting me change the ownership of this table I created because that's not something you just let somebody willy-nilly do. Now, one thing I can do as the owner here is I can go ahead and I can allow the InfoSec folks to create masking policies, but to do that grant of ownership, I'm going to have to use one of the high-level roles. And the idea would be that you would lock that up in a vault somewhere. Oh, no. Not even that. Well, you know why? Because ownership is still controlled by the managed access schema. So not even this highfalutin role can do that ownership change, right? This is really locking these things down. But what they can do is they can grant the ability to select and insert into that table, which is all InfoSec actually needs. They don't need to get the ownership on it and all the other extra stuff. That's the point of the managed access schema, to make sure ownership is not special in this case, right? You have to be specific about what you want them to be able to do, and security loves specific. Governance loves specific. So now we got to switch roles here, and by that I not only mean in the sense of roles in Snowflake, I mean quite literally roles from these personas we're going. So we're going from Richmond to Moss here, and what Moss is going to do is take advantage of the ability to insert that was just granted to his role and insert into that table. Now you might see here I have use role infosec here. The reason I'm not actually using that is because if we look up here and we see what happened to Moss. Well, Moss has a default role of InfoSec, which means that when Moss just comes on there, if you do a select current role, take advantage of some of that type ahead capability there, well, he's already InfoSec, so I don't need to do that. That's a little redundant here, but I like being complete in the code, so there it is. I'm going to go ahead and put some values into that row axis mapping table, which I was granted the ability to do. And then I'm going to create a policy to control access row by row in that customers table that we created in the beginning. Now let's go through this policy real quick. What this is saying is I'm going to select one, which of course will always come true. From this row axis mapping table, I'm going to say if the current role, the role that's trying to do select, is matching the role name, like let's say marketing, and the country is like this national letter thing, which is in this case UK, then I'm going to be allowing it, because it's going to be saying allowed is true, and then that will come out to true. Now of course, this makes no sense, this policy. Why? Because why would you let marketing see the UK and IT see the US and all that? But it does demonstrate that you can go row by row based on the values there, and that's what we want to do. Now you might be noticing this share part. We'll get to that in a little while. But of course you always default an I, and that's what this policy is doing. Now I'm going to let the IT admin, who is in fact sort of the DBA in this role, apply this to the tables where it makes sense. Oh, no, I'm not. Right, because of course, again, I can't do that ownership stuff. I need to do that with the higher level role when I'm using a managed access schema. Right, so this allows me to lock this down so people can't just pass around the ability to do this stuff. But now that Richmond does have that capability, we're going to go back over here. We're going to get in as Richmond again. And now Richmond's going to go ahead and alter this table so that it now uses that policy. Here we go. So now basically it's saying this row axis policy is applied to this make no sense policy to this column, birth country, and it's saying now, okay, I can't do that anymore. Now, if you remember, a little while ago, as Richmond, we did a select star, and we got all the rows, right? Now we get none of the rows. Why? Because we read this thing, and we saw that ITC admin gets nothing. It's set to false, right? So that is showing me it's working. But I do want to see it working with actual data. So now we're going to go over to Doug. Doug has a default role of marketing. And marketing, as we saw, was actually granted some of these capabilities. So let's go ahead and see what Doug can see. And sure enough, he only sees the UK values, which is appropriate based on this fictional set of policies and controls. But that's not all we want to do. We want to put even more control in place. We're going to actually use a masking policy as well. And we already granted Moss's IT, or InfoSec role, the ability to do that. So we're going to go ahead and apply it. And then I'm not going to pull the same trick on you again. You know the manage access schema means that I have to use the security admin role to grant out the ability to apply that. And then I'm going to jump over to our friend Richmond, who has the capability to apply this thing. And we're going to alter my table again. We're going to modify the email address column, and we're going to say that this masking policy applies to it based on something else. Okay, so now we do that. We go back to our friend Doug in marketing, who does have the ability to see this data. And the thing that's going to happen now is that when Doug runs the same SQL he ran before, he's going to get slightly different results. Now, what we see is a masking policy, right? So as we would expect, that column we applied this to, email address, has some masked values. Now, that is the generally available feature today. You can actually go ahead and use that. And all the stuff we've been doing up to now have been generally available. But I'm also sneaking in a little private preview magic, because as you can see, not all of these values are masked. In fact, what I see is that some of them are actually showing up, but only when opt-in says yes. And that's exactly what this policy is saying, because this is actually a conditional masking policy, which is a private preview feature at the time of this recording. And what I'm saying is if the opt-in says yes, then you get the call value, else you're getting masked, and that lines up exactly with what we're seeing over there, right? But what if I share this, right? So a lot of the other sessions you're going to see probably deal with sharing. So what am I going to do if I share this? Well, you might have noticed, remember, we were talking about sharing up here. I'm going to steal that little piece of text there. Let's set up a share and see what happens. Okay, so I'm going to go to data, and I'm going to use the UI to do this just because this is not something that we need to worry about at a code level, but I could do this at a code level. I'm also going to do something unusual. I'm going to just share the table itself. Usually you would share a secure view. That's the general practice. But we're not going to do that because we're not going to spend that much time on it. Then I know the account I want to share this with. So I'm going to say create share. So now I've created a share with this name to this account, and that account only. It's a direct share from one to the other. And once that's made, there we go. So the data is successfully shared. Now I go to that other account. Here we go. And spoiler alert, you can probably tell what's going to happen here. But I'm going to go into data. I'm going to go to shared data. I'm going to go with shared with me. And I see that Renum Industry share. And I'm going to call it that again. And it's going to say what roles do you want to allow access to this information. And then we hit the Get Data button. And it does its thing. And now we have a database. That is that Renum Industry share, which means I can go over here into a ye old worksheet, and I can go ahead and select data from that. But what I want you to notice is that the only rows I'm seeing are rows from the UK. Why? Because back here at the source, I set a policy which said that if the invoker share was that share, and it's the UK, then you can see those rows. So the only rows that are coming across are the UK rows. And we might notice, if we take these two rows and compare them, that, in fact, only where it says yes am I seeing that. So the masking policy is also in effect across there. So I've got just the rows that have the UK, and in each column I have that same conditional masking, right? And that would be true even if I masked this whole column. That's not part of the private preview. But that's super cool. I can do things at the source and have them apply at the target. All right, so that's sharing. Let's look at another preview feature, although this is a public preview feature. This is tagging, right? So first, do a little bit of preparation, right? I think I'm in here. I'm as Douglas right now, so I'm going to get out of Douglas, go back to Moss, because Moss is our InfoSec dude. He's the one who wants you to tag your information so that you can more easily have policy against it. We're going to create a couple of tags as Moss. There we go. And then we're going to jump back over to Richmond. Security done well is always a team effort. And we're going to go ahead and alter the table and set the values of those tags. So what Moss did was created tags where you can put information, right? And now Richmond's saying, I want that customer table to have those values for those two tags. And then I can actually go grab the values of those tags and use them for different purposes. All right, so here, grab the value, and here we see, right, the calendar tag is in fact set to geeks for that particular object, our customer's table, right? Well, since we've gone preview, we might as well go private preview, since we're all such good friends now, right? What we're going to do is we're going to try to run classification on our table, right? So to do that, I am going to go and run these extract semantic categories. And when I run that, let's see what happens. It's going to look at the values, and it's going to try to classify the information it finds. In other words, tell you what's in there. Well, why doesn't that return any data? Well, you should know this trick by now. Of course, I expected it to return no data. Why? Because classification does not let you break the security model. This role can't see any of the data, so it can't classify it, of course. But you know what? That's not something that we think any of these characters might be doing. Jen is more of a cross between the business and IT, and so she's thinking forward to, well, we're going to get more and more information. How are we going to, well, classify that information? Now, she has the ability to see some of this data. Now, she's in the IT role, so she only sees U.S. roles, which, of course, makes no sense, as the policy name implies, and she has some math stuff. So when she goes and does that extract semantic categories, what we'll expect is that there'll be some interesting things that happen to the data, right? Now, we got this JSON return, which is telling me the results, right? And we see some interesting things here, right? Gender, with full 100% possibility, is set it to be a quasi-identifier, a technical category in privacy, for gender, which makes perfect sense because that is, in fact, the gender category. Now, why is that 100%, right? And why is birth country also 100% as a quasi-identifier? Well, because if we go back here, we can see the birth country. You can see all those values. You can see all the genders. So when it does the sample to look and classify, it gets a full sample. Now, it only gets a partial sample on this email address category. And so it's not as sure, even though this is a stronger thing, an identifier, it's not as sure about that because it can't see all the data. Jen, she's pretty smart. She knows something about Snowflake that maybe you do not. That is that you can do some interesting processing on something like JSON. So we're going to go ahead and do some of that processing. First, she's going to play around and try to figure out, well, how do I get specific pieces of information out of this, right? And she's going to use some of these interesting functions, like flattening out that JSON so I can see some more of the information. Now, that gets me down to a point where I get, a specific view, right? And this is just the gender result. So that's interesting, but I want to make it more friendly, right? I want to make it so that my boss can read it, right? So she comes up with this query. Now, this is some neat stuff, right? If I'm honest with you, it was a person who knows a lot more about SQL that helped me write this, because I'm the security guy. But Jen's not easily satisfied, so she wants to do more. Maybe not just this gender column. She wants to do all the columns. Sure, why not, right? Oh, but then the key was only a single key, so now I need to say, okay, well, I need to put the key in there as something that will separate out these row by row, make it make more sense. And now let's see what happens here. So, yeah, so there we go. So now we've got the key. That's really the column name, isn't it? So, all right, let's fix that too. Again, Jen, she's not satisfied easily. So we're going to make that the column name. And in fact, you know what? It's a little sloppy to have all of those things in there with those nulls, right? Because we only care where we have strong, good results. So we're also going to say where that probability, because that's going to give me that strong result, is not null. And now, what do I have? I have some really nice clean data that tells me where I had columns with excellently high probabilities, 100% in this case, categorized, classified into specific categories. That is cool stuff. Now, that's all the fun with SQL we can have, and sadly, we go back to slides. All right, so hopefully that was informative and interesting for everybody. I tried to make it nice and evenly paced. Of course, when you get your hands on the code, you'll be able to follow it step by step as well. And that's the whole point. You'll get to build this out for yourself. But now let's think a little bit about what we saw. So first of all, the platform we're looking at, Snowflake, is built on a rock solid foundation. That's not just my opinion. That's the opinion of many third-party auditing organizations. And I know that compliance is no substitute for security, but these auditors do make us write things down in great detail. So we have had to prove again and again that our Snowflake data cloud meets more high standards than most other systems on Earth. Full statement. We've seen we have full role-based access control for all the objects that are involved. We have column, row, and we even saw some of that neat conditional stuff that we can use to protect your information. And that is the real meat of how you're going to be able to achieve a lot of this PII protection that you would need to do if you're going to bring that data to the data cloud. We saw some of these advanced features, that private secret stuff that, since we're all friends now, I let you, I let you see. Talk to your local sales representative if you want to get in on some of those private previews. And last but not least, and definitely not least, is the importance of how all of this being standard stuff you can do with Snowflake means that it is stuff you can expect to see integrated with our excellent partners. I know that, just before this, we will have done the financial services launch. Our partner Elation worked with us on an excellent set of governance demos that was based on the EDMC Council CDMC controls that they released just a few months back. And that partnership and many others prove that, solutions you may already have and solutions you may know you need are things you can tie into Snowflake and make this story more complete. Make this story about governance full stop, not just governance for Snowflake. So, what can you do now? I bet you've sat through a couple sessions and you've seen some of this before, but certainly you can go get these developer resources at developers.snowflake.com. All of this code that you've seen today will be available at the Quick Start site at quickstarts.snowflake.com. And for those of you with a good memory all the way back to the beginning, if you do want to read that blog, there's the link. You can go to snowflake.com/blog, and you'll probably find it just by clicking around, or you can try to type that link in from memory, your choice. And with that, I thank you very much for spending this brief interlude here with me and with Snowflake. And I hope that the rest of the event is productive and helps you build what you need to get done.